My dear friends, cher ami, mein teure Freund, the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is happy to be celebrating its 8th successful year, recognizing and rewarding the finest Canadian writing on Jewish themes and subjects. I'm Edward Trapunski. As always, I'm privileged and honored to be the chair of the jury for the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards and to welcome all of you. We will honor 8 books this year. 5 winning authors are in attendance to accept their awards and to speak about their books. We will hear from the other 3 authors remotely. COVID has taken its toll. I know you would all like to meet the authors in person. We are glad that you found a way to celebrate the authors whose books we are honoring on Zoom. We wish that we could finally see all the authors and all of you live, but we are cautious. We want to ensure that we are respectful to everybody and that everybody feels safe and welcome. Maybe next year, but I said the same thing last year. Mir sagt in Yiddish, Eder Chebon Redden will es sagen a paar Wörter. Before we begin, I want to say a few words. These are some acknowledgments. The Israel and Golda Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University graciously hosts the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. York University recognizes that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campus are located and precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges the presence on the traditional territory of the many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tkaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation and Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is an offshoot of the Canadian Jewish Book Awards, which was founded by Adam Furstenberg more than 30 years ago. May his memory be for a blessing. He left us a legacy of integrity and service to the Jewish community and to the literary community, and we try very hard to live up to it with integrity. Adam was one of the founding members of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, along with me, Sarah Horowitz, Alain Goldschlager, Michael Posner, Judy Stoffman, and Judith Gert, and he served on the first jury. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards is truly grateful to Sarah Horowitz, who, as the head of the Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies 8 years ago, gave the awards a home. We're fortunate that Julie Feinberg, the center's coordinator, also coordinates the awards with the flavor that we can all enjoy. A thank you also to David Groskin for the hours he puts into maintaining our website and organizing the reminders you get. The Kashitsky Center allows us to maintain our independence without interference and without influence. If you read the Code of Conduct on our website, we recognize that the jurors' expertise means that connections to others in their field is likely, and we are very careful to guard against any conflicts of interest. The goal is to recognize the best books. Now I'd like to introduce my friend, my fellow juror, Sarah Horowitz, with greetings from the Golda and Israel Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies.
Great, thanks so much. It's such a treat to see real faces in a real room in such proximity. It's been a long time, and so I'm particularly delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Israel and Golda Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University. And I welcome all of you to this award ceremony for the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. The Koshitsky Center hosts the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards as part of our center's commitment to nourishing, nurturing, and educating people in Jewish literary culture. We are very grateful, though, we don't do this alone, and we're grateful to our academic partners, that is to say, a consortium of universities across Canada, Jewish studies programs, Holocaust centers, Canadian Jewish studies programs, join us in supporting this literary award. I want to thank them publicly, and if you are watching us remotely, we will put a visual of their names and their logos so you can be acquainted with them as well. It's wonderful to be in partnership with such fabulous institutions, and we're really grateful for your supporting these literary awards. The Koshitsky Center is home to graduate and undergraduate programs in Jewish studies, and also we host a large number of public programming, hopefully in person, but certainly remotely, on different aspects of Jewish history, Jewish culture, and community. And I hope you will join us in those events. If you're not yet on our distribution list so that you get notified of such things, please feel free to ask us to put you on our list, and we will happily send you emails and keep you up to date on what's going on here. I know you'll enjoy some of our events. This year's award ceremony is dedicated to the memory of Professor Irving Abella, a noted historian who for many years was my colleague here at York and who passed away sadly only a few months ago this past summer. In some ways, I owe my own position as a professor here at York University to Irving Abella, who was on the committee of people who hired me. Although we worked in different disciplines and largely in different areas, we intersected in our interests about, certainly about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. And I was very impressed by the way he melded together academic research and scholarship with engagement with a broader community. It's something I very much admire and hope and try to emulate. My colleague on the jury, Anna Porter, who unfortunately couldn't join us here this afternoon, wrote a few words in homage, really, to Irving, and I'd like to read what she wrote on her behalf. Irving Abella was an eminent historian who started two new fields of history in Canada, Canadian Jewish Studies and Canadian Labor History. He taught the first university course on Canadian Jewish history. His books include The Coat of Many Colors, 2 Centuries of Jewish Life in Canada, and he was a co-author with Hesh Troper of None is Too Many, the seminal book about Canadian government's refusal to accept Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust. I often tell my students that it is Canada's taking responsibility for that failure of being welcoming to fugitives and refugees that made it in later years and in our own time more open to refugees who need a safe haven. Irving Abella held the inaugural J. Richard Schiff Chair for the Study of Canadian Jewry at York University. For those of us who had the privilege to know him, Irving Abella will be remembered for his brilliance, his compassion, and his ability to listen. He was, and I'm concluding with Anna's last words, he was above all a mensch. So we are really honored to remember him at this moment, and now we will proceed with the awards.
The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards grows in stature every year and has become a cornerstone in the Canadian Jewish community's cultural calendar. With greetings from the Government of Canada, here is Yair Sachs, Member of Parliament for York South, the federal constituency adjacent to York University.
Dear friends, as the Member of Parliament for York Centre and a proud part of our Canadian Jewish community, it's an honor and a pleasure to be joining you today for this wonderful celebration. This is the 8th year of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, an incredible opportunity to recognize and reward the finest in Canadian writing on Jewish themes, subjects, and creativity. We have a rich and celebrated history of Jewish writing here in Canada, from Mordechai Richler to Irving Abella, and many, many more who have brought Jewish thought, heart, and history to the page and to the reader around the world. From fiction to biographies, from elevating the voices of our past to inspiring the youth of our future, through Yiddish, scholarship, poetry, and more, today we are honoring and awarding with such pride the tremendous works and creative achievements of Jewish literature. Your work and the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards enrich and promote Canadian Jewish writing and culture, allowing us to have a window of understanding and learning about our collective past, our shared present, and the possibilities of the future. Enjoy the evening's events. Congratulations to all the authors. We celebrate each and every one of you. Thank you.
As was mentioned, culture is a major measure of the vibrancy of Jewish life in Canada. The Canadian Jewish Literary Awards this year has had more submissions than ever before. There are a lot of explanations about why. Maybe because of our stature, that people know more about us and are submitting. Maybe because more people are writing about Jewish themes. Or maybe just because of the pandemic, a lot of writers had the time and the opportunity to sit in front of their computers and write books, and publishers published them this year. And we're very, very happy to have all the submissions. And I personally am glad that I got to read all the books because it taught me so much, and it entertained me and it educated me. So I thank all the authors who have submitted this year. Now, we're honoring 8 outstanding books for 2022, and they're truly outstanding. The depth and the breadth of the books shows the vibrancy of the culture and the appeal of Jewish themes for both fiction and nonfiction writers. Today you're going to meet Joanna Levy, the author of the book Sorry for Your Losses for children and youth literature. For fiction, Kerry Fagan for his book Great Adventures for the Faint of Heart. Poet Adam Saul is honored for Broken Dawn Blessings. And in scholarship, Greg Gardner for Poverty, Wealth, and Charity in Jewish Antiquity. On Zoom, you'll hear from Justin Kami, the translator and editor of From the Vilna Ghetto to Nuremberg, memoir and testimony by the great Yiddish poet Abraham Sutzkever. For history, Jeffrey Veidlinger for the midst of civilized Europe, the pogroms of 1918 to 1921, and the onset of the Holocaust. In the Holocaust category, Kingdom of Night, Witnesses to the Holocaust by Mark Selisak. And in the memoir category, Charlotte Chalier for But I Live, 3 stories of child survivors of the Holocaust. The winners will join the juror for more insight with questions and answers afterwards. With the cash value of the prizes we're giving out this year is significant for the writers, but it's the reputation and standing of the jury that underscores its importance. And I want to thank the jury for their diligence in reading all the books that came in this year. The award winners are going to do most of the talking and reading this year, and the members of the jury will be doing the introductions. I'd like to introduce the distinguished jury. Rona Arato is an award-winning author of 15 children's and youth books. Miriam Borden is a PhD student in Yiddish at the University of Toronto and is an oral history fellow at the Yiddish Book Center. Rita Davies is the chair of the Ontario Arts Council. Alain Goldschlager is the former director of the Holocaust Literature Research Institute and professor of French at Western University. Sarah Horowitz, who you've met, is professor of comparative literature and Jewish studies at the Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University. Anna Porter, who unfortunately is ill and can't be with us today, is one of Canada's most notable book publishers and editors. We want to acknowledge our donors, our benefactors, our supporters, and the members of the community who have helped us through the years. Through the generosity of our patrons, we have raised the funds to sustain the awards program. Through these challenging times, we plan to grow even stronger. Once again, the Israel and Golda Kashitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University is our main sponsor. The Jewish Studies programs at McGill, Concordia, Carleton University, University of Ottawa, University of Toronto, and Western University have long supported the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. Jill Reitman, Alan Blatt, Elaine Weisglass, Nora Gold, Saul Hermelin, Carl Ehrlich, the First Nariver Congregation, and the Yiddish Committee of the UJA Federation have generously contributed this year. We especially want to acknowledge the Gerald Sheff and Shanatha Khan Foundation, who have been our sustaining donors right from the beginning and continue to support us. We thank you. We'd like you to partner with us. Building a more robust donor base would allow us to increase the value of the prizes to winners, to attract more entries, to welcome larger audience, and in turn to do more to promote Jewish culture in Canada. Click on how to donate on our website. And now to the awards. And to present our first awards, here is Rona Arato.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here, and it's my pleasure, just put on my glasses so I can read. It's my pleasure to introduce Joanne Levy. Joanne's love of books began at an early age, and being the youngest and only female among 4 children, she was often left to her own devices and could frequently be found sitting in a corner and reading. And she's turned that love of books, of reading, into writing books for young people. This year, this year's book, her winner, Sorry for Your Loss, has already won numerous awards. It is the CJLA winner, and it's also a Sidney Taylor Awards notable book, Canadian Children's Best Books for Kids and Teens, and that's just a few of the awards that it has been nominated for and won. Sorry for Your Loss is a beautifully written book that deals with the Jewish rituals surrounding death while immersing the reader in a heartwarming story about love, loss, family, and the healing power of friendship. It is my pleasure to introduce this year's winner of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Youth, Joanne. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And your book.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, Rona. And forgive me for reading, but writers do better when they write stuff down, so. Thank you to the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, its sponsors and donors, and particularly the jury for this incredible honor. Many wonderful Jewish books for kids came out last year, and many written by respected colleagues and friends, so I suspect the job of the jury was a difficult one. It's an amazing honor that you found a little something special in Sorry for Your Loss that made you choose it as this year's winner in the Children and Youth category, for which I am overwhelmingly grateful. Verklempt is the word that keeps popping into my head, and I think it's times like this for which the word was invented. I'm going to try not to cry, but I can't promise. Writing is so often a solitary endeavor, and even after you publish a book, it can feel like screaming into the void. So receiving an honor like this is very validating, and to receive it for a book that is so personal makes it even more special. But before I get too gushy or teary, see, I predicted that was going to happen, I'd like to read a short passage, one of my favorite parts of the book. And to give you a bit of context, Evie Wallman's family owns a small Jewish funeral home, very similar to the one my dad manages in Hamilton, and she works there part-time in the summer, cleaning and keeping the fridge stocked and giving out tissues at funerals. She's never dealt directly with grieving families one-on-one before, until this day, when her mom has asked her to spend time with a boy who has just lost his parents in a terrible accident, while his uncle makes funeral arrangements. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go well. Evie's attempts to console him cause him to lock himself in the bathroom. Remember how you said I'd be a good funeral director? Yes, Dad said. Yeah, well, you were wrong. That last word got stretched out because I was crying again. "I don't think so," Dad said as he pulled me into a hug. I worried about slobbering all over his clean white shirt, but I couldn't help it. After I calmed down, I pulled out of his arms and mopped up the rest of my tears. "Tell me what happened," he said, tugging me over to a pew where we both sat down. Once I was done explaining, I took a few deep breaths and crumpled the damp tissues in my fists. "Grief is a difficult thing," Dad said, "and losing a parent, let alone two, is life-changing at any age. But for someone so young, well, I can't imagine how awful it must be." "And I just made it worse," I said. Dad smiled sadly. "You may not have helped, but I doubt you made it worse. Look, Oren isn't in a place right now where anyone can say anything that will help. He needs to work through his grief, and all we can do is be there for what he needs, even if what he needs is space and time to sort it out himself." It made sense, but I still felt like I'd messed up. "And not some random girl who will talk his ear off?" Dad nodded and sighed. "I'm sorry to say you're probably right there, Evie, but you have to remember this isn't about you. Part of being a good funeral director, and even a good friend, is knowing that someone may not want to be consoled. They may not welcome your words of support, and you need to respect that. Someone else's grief is not for you to solve. Let Oren grieve in his own way." So that's just a little piece, one of my favorite parts of the book. This book was born out of grief, my own grief, after losing my mother after a very brief illness in 2013. After she passed in the hospital, she was transported to the funeral home. When she arrived, we got to see her one last time in the room marked private, where most people don't go. But as I stood there in the Tahara room, while it was the worst day and I was overwhelmed with grief, I was also weirdly comforted by knowing how she would be taken care of, knowing that she would be treated with the utmost respect. It didn't take away the grief, of course, but it let me feel okay as I could be in those circumstances, leaving her there and having her be cared for by the Chevra Kadisha, the volunteers who would prepare her body for burial. So it was that knowledge and comfort that inspired this book. Most people, especially kids, don't have that kind of behind-the-scenes access, and I wanted to sort of pull back the curtain on what happens to us after we die and what funerals even are. I wanted to give kids a safe space to explore death and funerals and show them that their loved ones would be literally cared for by the people who take their task very seriously. I also wanted to talk about grief and what it means and how to speak to people who are grieving, that it's okay to not know what to say, that what matters is being there, and that it's not about you, the consoler. And finally, and maybe most importantly, I wanted to honor my dad and the important work he does, along with the rest of the people who work behind the scenes to provide necessary and important services to people at their hardest times. I can't look at him or I'll start crying. He's here today, and he's a modest guy, but I share this award with him because not only did he help me with the details and fact-checking, the literal writing of this book, but he was my greatest inspiration. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my agent, Hillary McMahon, who's also here, my editor for this and 4 other books, Tanya Trafford, and the entire team at Orca Book Publishers who supported this book from the very beginning. Also, a huge thanks to my extremely supportive husband, Deke, who has been there from the very first moment that I thought about writing for publication. It's his unwavering support over the years, shown in every way, from letting me talk out plot holes, to encouraging me to keep at it when the writing was difficult, to driving me all over to bookish events, including this one today, that has made every book I've written possible. Thank you all again for this honor, and now I'm going to sit down with my verklemtedness, and that is a word. Thank you.
Great Adventures for the Fate of Heart by Kerry Fagan wins the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards 2022 Award for Fiction. This award was going to be presented by Anna Porter, but as you've heard, she's not well, and I'm acting in her behalf. Also, Kerry Fagan has COVID in his household, and you will see him on video. talking about his book as well. Kerry Fagan is a master storyteller. Great Adventures for the Faint of Heart is a delightful collection of 10 short stories. They highlight a diverse range of seemingly ordinary people who take a chance on life and discover that they can, if the occasion arrives, be extraordinary. The characters convey an especially Jewish urban sensibility. A young woman given a painting by Picasso by her stepfather must acquire a wall to hang it on. A hippie family picks up a cello-playing hitchhiker who convinces them to get a television. And a man who takes his girlfriend's son on a road trip and discovers himself and discovers his girlfriend's son. These stories explore the tangled bonds of family and the complex web that holds them together. They delve into our acceptance of human frailty and our unpredictable capacity for change, and demonstrate Kerry's wonderful sense of what makes us human and what makes us laugh and cry. Here's Kerry Fagan.
Hi, everybody. I'm very sorry I'm not there in person with those of you who are actually at the award ceremony. It was my intention, but we have some COVID in the house, so I'm talking to you this way. First of all, I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank everyone who's responsible for the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. It means a great deal to me. I think, you never in a writing career, an arts career, really lose the need for encouragement and to know that somebody thinks you're doing a good job. So I wish you didn't, but you still do. So thank you so much for that encouragement and that support. It's just tremendous. I also, while I'm at it, I want to thank everyone at Freehand Books, my publishing house, Debbie Willis, my wonderful editor, and Sam Haywood, my agent. I want to thank all of them for being so supportive, and my family as well, who have just always been there for me. Now, this book, Great Adventures for the Faint of Heart, is a book of short stories. I've often been told that my work is a little bit on the quiet side, and I've never felt that. I've always thought that my characters were going on the most tremendous adventures in life. And I guess I've always felt that ordinary life does feel to each of us like it is a great adventure. And that's ultimately where my title comes from, Great Adventures for the Faint of Heart. And so I guess I take this award as an acknowledgement of the importance of all our ordinary lives. Now I'm going to read just one paragraph. It's the beginning. I chose it a little bit arbitrarily. It's the beginning of a short story called The Punch. They came into my classroom to arrest me. 2 polite officers, male and female, burdened with the heavy accoutrement of law enforcement, guns, walkie-talkies, nightstick sprays, flak jackets. It was the woman officer who asked me to put my hands behind my back so that she could clap on the handcuffs. Even while being compliant, it was hard not to tense with resistance. The only student to witness this scene was Jeffrey Millenberg, who had come in for extra help. As they led me out, I said to Jeffrey, probably out of some desire to make everything appear normal, "There's no getting around memorization. Some stuff in chemistry, you just have to know." Thanks so much.
Great pleasure to introduce this year's winner in poetry, Adam Soul's Broken Dawn Blessings. Now, there were quite a number of very strong contenders in this category, but Soul's astonishing and powerful new collection simply soared to the top. This is a masterful work, searching personal and public pain and the moments of blessing, joy, and wonder in between. Broken Dawn Blessings showcases Saul's deep understanding of Jewish culture and tradition, while its lyric virtuosity connects us in an appreciation of our shared humanity, demonstrating the power of prayer, the power of poetry. With this volume, Adam Soul proves himself once again to be an important voice in Canada's literary scene and one of its most significant poets. Please welcome Adam Soul.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I have 3 thank yous to make, and then I'm going to read 2 poems. The thank yous first to the jury. I was on this jury before, and so I know the sort of fraught and tense discussions that can come of it. It's a great honor to me that you chose to honor my book this way, and that kind of encouragement, as Carrie said, is very valuable and very meaningful to me. Second, I'd be remiss without thanking my publisher, ECW Press, in particular Jack David, who's here today, and Michael Holmes. Independent publishing is alive and well in Canada, despite all the efforts of outside forces to defeat it. And so thank you to them and for all their continued good work. And I'd like also to thank my wife, Yael. There's material in this book that is uncomfortable and difficult. It's not easy being married to a writer. And she handled this being out in the world with her trademark grace. I'm going to put the glasses on so I can read without putting it right in front of my face. I'm going to read 2 poems from the book. The book is structured loosely around the Birchot HaShachar, the morning blessings, the series of prayers that traditional Jews say when they first wake up in the morning. And a lot of them are just one-liners. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, who heals the sick, who clothes the naked, who sets free the captive, those kinds of things. I'm going to read this one first. I'm going to read one of my particular favorites. Is called Gives the Rooster Understanding. This is the prayer that thanks God for giving the rooster the understanding to know the difference between night and morning. I always imagine that when we say that prayer, there's a little bitterness, like, thanks a lot. I'm glad you remember that it's morning now, rooster. So this is called Gives the Rooster Understanding. Asher natan lesechvi v'na lehavchin bein yom uvein laila. Have to keep the TV sound down to eggshell, wise, fragile sleep. It's all police shootings anyway. Police shooting news, police shooting movies, even police shootings in sports. So I go out to the porch where an idiotic robin built her nest too close to my chair. Now she's scared to feed her chicks while I'm sitting here. Another bloody summer halfway finished, and not a soul among us who can set the broken bone of the world aright. Okay, here she tries again, another angle from the awning. Come, redneck, come at me in my seeing seat. I am here with my cracked mug of wakefulness, desperate to believe. And the other poem I'm going to read is called The Soul You Have Given Me, Elohai Neshama Shenatata Bi. There's you'll probably sense there's a bit of irony in it for me. The good widow keeps inviting me to play online Scrabble, but I can't bring myself to let her win. My life is littered with missed chances to do better in the world. The sum of these impulses, often ignored or late, in myself and my neighbors is what God is. That's who I pray to. Whom? whom worth 12 points, even without the double word score. Thank you very much.
Hello again. I'm going to present the award for scholarship to Greg Gardner, who's written the book Wealth, Poverty, and Charity in Jewish Antiquity. Charity is central to the Jewish tradition. In our prayers during the days of awe over the past couple of weeks, we heard that tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, commonly translated as repentance, prayer, and charity, could lead to our redemption. But do we really know what charity is in the Jewish tradition? Wealth, Poverty, and Charity in Jewish Antiquity by Greg Gardner, the founding chair of the Jewish Studies program at the University of British Columbia, is full of surprises. The book explores the origins of these concepts, how the earliest rabbis from the time of Talmud reflected on the notions of wealth, poverty, and charity, and how their interpretations differed from and informed how Jews approach these concepts today. Professor Gardner also shows how Christian attitudes towards wealth, poverty, and charity evolved from the ideas of the ancient rabbis and where they diverged. The scholarship in wealth, poverty, and charity is sophisticated, and yet the book is superbly readable by anybody with an interest in Jewish ethical thought. Please welcome the recipient of the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Scholarship, Greg Gardner.
Thank you. I'm truly honored to receive this award. I will say a little bit about the book in a minute, but first I have a little bit of gratitude to convey. I would like to thank the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards, its jury, its supporters. Special thanks to Edward Trapunski for both the phone call about the award, which is the best phone call I received in a long time, and for writing the very thoughtful citation. And your words about the way that the book is written really mean a lot to me. I really try to put a lot of effort into how the ideas are presented. Thank you also to Julie Feinberg and New York University and the Kaczynski Center. I would also like to thank my home university, UBC, the University of British Columbia, my department, students and colleagues in the Department of Ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern Studies who have supported me in countless ways. The Diamond family of Vancouver has not only endowed the chair that I hold, but has also supported my work, as well as research and teaching in Jewish studies more broadly at UBC. I've also received support from several institutions. I won't list them all, but maybe just a couple of highlights. Michigan Center for Judaic Studies, Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I thank my editor, Eric Schmidt, and the whole team at the University of California Press, who just made this publication process just absolutely a wonderful process. Above all, I would like to thank my family, my parents, Fran and Keith, who are watching on Zoom, my brothers, Kevin and Scott, my extended family, Cindy and Don, and the Browns. Above all, my wife, Rabbi Carrie Brown, to whom this book is dedicated. And I thank my two children, Yael and Jonah. It means so much to have you here with me today. I love you so much. My work and research generally focuses on ancient Judaism, its history, archaeology, and literature. This includes the ancient rabbis and rabbinic texts, such as the Mishnah, Tosefta, Midrashim, and Talmuds. These are texts that come from the first centuries CE and continue to be read and studied, and for many people, continue to be followed closely as Jewish law to this day. I came to the topic with a background in economics. I was looking for ways to combine my interest in economics with my passion for studying ancient Judaism. I began to explore this first during my MA work at Hebrew University, and then more intently during my doctoral work at Princeton. In 2015, I published my first book, which was on communal giving in early Judaism, particularly the Tamchui and Kupah, the charity fund and the soup kitchen. This was the beginning of collective institutionalized philanthropy in Judaism and would become hallmarks of Jewish life. These are the ancient roots of the little blue boxes that I will always remember from my Bubby's home. After my first book, I felt like I still had much more to learn and many more questions to ask, and more to hopefully contribute to our understanding of Jewish charity. So in my new book, I argue that the earliest rabbis saw the problem of poverty as a problem of wealth, how wealth is created and destroyed, gained and lost, how wealth creates social difference by defining rich versus poor, how wealth is conceptualized, measured, and allocated, and how the rabbis recommend to motivate others to part with their wealth and to give it to the needy. I also discuss how the rabbis' own socioeconomic position influenced their thinking. The ancient rabbis themselves tended to be well off. They had sort of the wherewithal and the means to sit and ponder ideas about Jewish theology and Jewish law. They could not help but see the topic of care for the poor from the perspective of potential givers, more so than recipients. Ultimately, charity, tzedakah, is a commandment that is remarkably incomplete or imperfect. The commandment is to give some of your personal wealth to the poor. There is no commandment to receive. In these ancient texts, the rabbis effectively invented Jewish approaches to charity, or tzedakah, and philanthropy. Thank you very much again for this honor.
Hi, my name is Miriam Borden, and I am pleased to be awarding the award in the Yiddish category. This year's award goes to Justin Cami for his translation titled From the Vilna Ghetto to Nuremberg, Memoir and Testimony, which is an account of the life and survival in the face of death and destruction during the Holocaust, in the voice of the preeminent Yiddish poet, Avram Sutzkever. In this artful and thoughtful translation, the first into English, Dr. Justin Cami brings together multiple registers of Sutzkever's voice at different moments in time. His horrifically vivid, harrowing account of the destruction of the Jews of Vilna, and his sober reportage years later as the only Jewish writer to testify at the Nuremberg trials. We selected this book for the prize in the Yiddish category because of the way Dr. Cami weaves these elements together as an editor and a translator with a particular focus on the Yiddish of Sutzkever's original. We were blown away by the work as a whole, and it was our immense pleasure to recognize it with this award. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Justin Cami, who will read an excerpt or two from his book.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for those generous words. I want to thank you and the entire jury of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for this honor. It's not often that a book first published in the Soviet Union and in Paris in 1946 gets recognition all these years later. And I think it's even more wonderful on two accounts. One, that up in Canada, they still recognize the importance of Yiddish, and that really touches me. And that they recognize the importance of the scholarly work that translators do. That it's not only technical work, but scholarly work in trying to interpret texts and then bring them to new audiences. So I'm really very touched to have had this work recognized. I know that Sutzkever's family found this very meaningful when I told them, and it's all the more meaningful to have it awarded up in Canada, where I was born, where I was raised, and where I went to college, and where I return so often. So I'm going to read a couple of excerpts, one from the beginning of the book and one from Sutzkever's diary notes of his testimony at Nuremberg. When I turned on the radio the morning of 22 June 1941, a hysterical German scream leapt out at me like a pack of lizards. From the clamor, I realized that the German army had crossed the border. I darted outside, eager for a familiar face. I came across Noach Prilutsky, professor of Yiddish studies at Vilnius University. He was absorbed in his research on Yiddish phonetics. Hitler began to dig his own grave with the first bomb dropped on Russian territory, Prilutsky prophesied. But he had no advice about what we ought to do. He turned back to his work. Firefighters rushed through the streets. A fire was burning next to the Green Bridge. I turned towards Mother's home, which was located just beyond the bridge. She was relieved to see me. She showered me with kisses and tried to assure me that everything would be all right. The bombs fell relentlessly. Across the Valia River, a gas reservoir was on fire. The smell made it all the way into our little room and tore at our throats. Mom, we have to save ourselves. Mother stroked my hair, kissed my forehead, and with a painful expression I will never forget, told me, I'm not going anywhere, but you are my life. Go and save yourself. You have your entire life ahead of you. I'm going to read an excerpt from Sutzkever's diary entry after his testimony at the Nuremberg trials, dated Wednesday, February 27th, 1946. I've just concluded my testimony before the Nuremberg tribunal. The words are still glowing on my lips, words that I shrieked out before the entire world and for future generations. I was shaken to my very core. It was without question the most powerful experience of my 30-some years of life. I spoke for 38 minutes. It cannot be other than divine providence who put Russian into my mouth. I myself was not certain that I would manage to express my full feelings and memories in that language. It is still difficult for me to take stock of my feelings. Which is stronger, my sorrow or my desire for revenge? It seems to me that greater than either is the radiant, powerful feeling that our people lives, that it has outlived its executioners, and that no dark force can annihilate us. In a Jewish twist of fate, a Yiddish poet, perhaps the only one still alive from the ghettos of Europe, has come to Nuremberg to cast judgment on the Rosenbergs and on the Franks, and in so doing, perhaps also on the surviving remnants of fascism in other countries. This huge responsibility occupied my every brain cell. For 2 nights before my appearance, I couldn't shut my eyes. I saw my mother running naked over a snow-covered field. The warm blood from the bullet wound that pierced her heart trickled onto the floor of my room and encircled me like a ring. So these are only 2 excerpts from different parts of Sutzkever's From the Vilna Ghetto to Nuremberg.
Thank you so much for that. Really remarkable. So I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Help us understand your role as a translator and the work itself. I guess I'm wondering initially, so what drew you to the work? What drew you to this project? And how did you end up combining, these two sort of separate works, the memoirs of the ghetto and the war, and then his memoirs of Nuremberg?
So I've been working for years on what I like to call When Yiddish Was Young. And that is an opportunity to reframe post-war understandings of Yiddish as weak, as vulnerable, as murdered, as martyred, as the language of older people or aging people, and to help people understand that Yiddish for many centuries was the language of cradle to grave, was the language of Jewish culture in Ashkenaz. And my particular focus was on interwar Vilna, Sutzkever's hometown, and the writers of Jung Vilna, that is the writers of the 1930s, where we see modernist experimentation, political engagement, and all types of other shenanigans that one would expect from a young writers group of late teenagers and people in their early 20s. And that's really how I got interested in Sutzkever to begin with. But it occurred to me that it was rather strange that although we have so much translated of Sutzkever's poetry, it was never decided to translate the only prose memoir he wrote about his time in the Vilna Ghetto. It had been translated into Hebrew, it had been translated into German, it had been translated into other languages, but never into English. And that's how I really got involved in wanting to show sort of this next stage in Sutzkever's career. However, it's a vexed document because it was written not during the war, it was written after the war at the invitation of Ilya Ehrenberg and other members of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee in Moscow, who had a particular agenda in what they wanted from writers who would contribute to the so-called Black Book that was meant to be an indictment of Nazi fascist crimes. So because Sutzkever wrote this in Moscow, or actually between Moscow and Vilna, he was traveling back and forth immediately after the city's liberation, part of the memoir, it seemed to me, would need to be also take into account the context of those who had invited him to write it and the context in which he found himself in wartime and immediate post-war Moscow. So that's why I combined Sutzkever's memoir, which was published as an independent document, and then also included several other elements. 1, his testimony from Nuremberg. 2, his diary entries about the testimony at Nuremberg. And then 3 essays about Soviet Jewish figures that help us understand the world and contextualize the moment when he wrote this. One is on Ilya Ehrenberg, the great Soviet Russian language writer. Another is on Shlomo Michols, the great Yiddish actor and director. And the other is on Peretz Markish, the great experimental Yiddish modernist poet. And And I think by bringing these essays together with the memoir, what we're able to do is to have a document that in a way looks at Sutskever's very brief, but I think critical Moscow years. That is the period between his rescue from the forests in 1944 and the moment where he eventually leaves Moscow, making his way first to Łódź, then to Paris, and then to Eretz Yisrael. So this allows us to really bring this period together and also to look at Sutskever as a prose writer and not only as a poet.
I wanted to ask you about that exact thing. That you're intimately familiar with his work as a poet, and I'm wondering to what extent you found his poetic voice in the prose that you were working with.
Well, interestingly, I think one of the reasons that this book hadn't been translated before into English was an assumption among fans of Sutskever, that Sutskever was such an accomplished master of language and of poetic form that anything different in a different register would be a diminishment and potentially threaten that reputation. But in reading this text, what I found is that this is an extremely moving, at times restrained, but at times quite expressive document that allows him to write in a different mode and perhaps allows him to work through some of the ideas that had already occurred to him and that would become the basis for poems, or the poems were written before and they became the way that allowed him to reconstitute his memory and to write the memoir. What I think was most fascinating was how little he writes about his own poetry in this memoir, how little he writes about his own work, how little he there are very few citations about his own work. So all of that is in a way a deflection towards the community, towards the collective experience. At the same time, as a literary scholar, I thought, wow, we have this memoir by Sutskever. We're going to be able to now find out the real details behind some of his most famous poems. We're going to be able to find out the actual information about Die Lehrerin Mira. We're going to be able to find out exactly what happened when we think of the Die Bleine Platten von Roms Druckerei, and so on and so on. What we find is that there's very little information about the context for these poems. And in a way, the truth of the poems is stronger in some cases than the truth of the mention of those particular incidents in the memoir. So it's when he's not necessarily writing about those moments that the memoir really finds its voice and excitement. And I also found it really interesting to read a Sutskever that also brings in a multiplicity of voices. He quotes a lot of people. So you have not only the memoir of this poet, but you also have the memoir of all of those who were talking to the poet or with whom the poet was interacting. And many of those find their way into the text as well.
Well, I think it is an extraordinary contribution to both Holocaust literature and to Holocaust testimony. I want to thank you so much for this book and for all of your work and your dedication to it. And congratulations again on this award.
Thank you so very much. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, Miriam.
Likewise.
So now I'm really delighted to be introducing to you Jeffrey Weidlinger, who we'll see in a moment up there on the screen. Jeffrey Weidlinger is the Joseph Brodsky Collegiate Professor of History and Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan. His research focuses on modern Jewish history, modern Russia and Eastern Europe, and Holocaust and oral memory. Jeffrey has been my colleague for a good number of years on the academic committee of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and in that capacity, I've been so impressed with his rigor, his insights, and his creativity. He's the author of several award-winning books, and they include, I won't mention them all, but they include The Moscow State Yiddish Theater, Jewish Culture on the Soviet Stage, Jewish Public Culture in the Late Russian Empire, and In the Shadow of the Shtetl, Small-Town Jewish Life in Soviet Ukraine. Today's award in the category of history honors his most recent book, In the Midst of Civilized Europe, The Pogroms of 1918 to 1921 and the Onset of the Holocaust. The history of these mass murders in early 20th century of the Jews of Ukraine in the years immediately following the First World War is an understudied history. It's overshadowed by the brutality of the Nazi regime, which came soon after. In his eloquent and searing book, In the Midst of Civilized Europe, Jeffrey Weidlinger masterfully reverses and reclaims that understudied history, using a range of archival materials and documents. He enables us to see these events. He gathers materials that describes them through the eyes of survivor victims, through the eyes of perpetrators, through the eyes of government officials and other eyewitnesses. Weidlinger traces the link between this earlier violence and the genocidal violence of the Nazi regime, and draws a line that extends the implications of this to contemporary events. So I'm going to shift out of your way so that you can give Jeffrey Weidlinger on the screen your full attention.
It's a great honor to have my book recognized by the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. It means a lot to me to have the acclamation of the jury, and I would like to congratulate all the other winners. In the Midst of Civilized Europe tells the tragic story of the anti-Jewish pogroms, or ethnic riots, that killed at least 100,000 Jews in some 500 different cities, towns, and villages throughout what is now Ukraine after the First World War. At the time, this violence shocked the world. There were mass demonstrations in London and New York. World leaders discussed it at the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, and newspapers published accounts in Palestine, Moscow, and Berlin. Today, though, these pogroms have been almost completely forgotten, overshadowed by the Holocaust 20 years later. Yet, as my book argues, we can't really understand the Holocaust until we recognize it as a continuation of this violence that preceded it. The mass murder of Jews in Eastern Europe really began some 15 years before Hitler came to power. In 1919, for instance, aid workers on the ground were warning of the wholesale physical extermination of the Jewish race. The New York Times quoted one activist who raised alarms that 6 million souls in Ukraine and in Poland have received notice that they are going to be completely exterminated. In other words, for those who witnessed the pogroms of 1918 to 1921, the Holocaust was hardly inconceivable. Rather, it was the logical next step. The disturbing irony that frames this book is that these pogroms occurred just as the Russian Revolution ousted the Tsar, and a newly established independent Ukrainian state was promising what was then the world's largest Jewish population a new era of peace and prosperity. As the people of Ukraine today fight for a pluralistic and democratic future in the face of Russian aggression once again, the lessons of this book have never been more important. I'm grateful to the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards for this recognition, and thank you all.
President Truman asked Earl Harrison to go in the DP camp and report on the situation in there. Earl Harrison, in the summer of '45, so just as the fight has finished, wrote a long report. And I'd like to just take a quote to put you in the mood. As matters now stand in June '45, we Americans and Allied, we appear to be treating the Jews as the Nazi treated them, except we do not exterminate them. Bergen-Belsen was the largest DP camp after the war. For many years, the DP camp stayed for about a dozen years after the war. Bergen-Belsen was closed only in 51. Bergen-Belsen was located in the British section, and consequently under British administration, which didn't specially favor the situation of Jews, which at some point reached 11,000 in the camp, the situation of Jews who wanted to go to Palestine, the best destination for them and the most thought of. So the camp was really a vacation. In the control of the camp, Brits called on Canadian capacity and used them to make the camp run. Even though the Canadian participation or presence has been acknowledged through the years, it has always been marginalized. And Mark Selinczak had to go and dig meticulously in a lot of small archives, and very few archives, as a matter of fact, but more and more on private documents to really establish what the Canadians did, were forced to do, were responsible to do, and has this book correct the image of what was the presence and activities and valued apport of Canadian in Bergen-Belsen for all those years. So, Mark Selinczak. That was the quotation you expected.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be home. And by home, I mean not only Canada, I mean not only Toronto, and I mean not only York University, but I also mean the Center for Jewish Studies, which I've long considered to be my intellectual home. I want to thank the organizers of this event, as well as the jury, and I offer my congratulations to the other award winners. It really is an honor to have my book listed alongside such impressive literature. I'd also like to take this time to thank both my paid editor, Len Husband of the University of Toronto Press, and my long-time, long-suffering, unpaid editor, my sister Stephanie, who is here with my mom, Colleen, and younger sister, Stacy. It was almost exactly 14 years ago, in September 2008, in my third year in the PhD program in humanities at York, that I emailed the Clara Thomas Archives. I was trying to piece together part of a puzzle for my doctoral dissertation, which was exploring British responses to the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in northwest Germany. During my research, I kept coming across the names of various Canadians who somehow became involved at the camp. But really, that's all that I had, names and not much else. And so I contacted the archives here at York and took a shot. Did they hold any material relating to Canadians who were in Germany at war's end? The answer that I received changed the course not only of my research, but really my life and my career. I was informed that the archive not only had letters by a Canadian who was in Germany in 1945. In fact, he wrote extensively about Bergen-Belsen. Surprised, I made an appointment to review the material. The discovery of those letters was a revelation. They were a sign that my research was about to take an interesting turn, and it encouraged me to push further, and I worked to incorporate the untold Canadian aspect of the liberation. Kingdom of Night represents a compilation of a 15-year-long journey to detail to reveal and examine the Canadian involvement at the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camps. Some of the primary accounts presented in the book were indeed found in local, provincial, and national archives, but many, many more were located in a lot of different ways, from lifelong friends of the dearly departed, comrades in arms, neighbors, children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. I have been given access to rare, often never before examined documents relating to one of the 20th century's most horrific crimes. And it has allowed me to tell a story that I think has long been ignored in Canadian history. Liberation was a transformative experience for both liberators and survivors. Their lives intersected in unexpected ways, and neither liberator nor survivor would ever be the same again. In closing, I'd like to share part of an account that ends Kingdom of Night. It was written by Abraham Brenner of Montreal, who was in the Royal Canadian Corps of Signals. After the war, Brenner was stationed in Hanover, Germany. He and some of his fellow soldiers learned that there was a small Jewish community of survivors nearby. Brenner and 9 others traveled to Bergen-Belsen, where they attended a Yom Kippur service in one of the few Jewish communities remaining after the Holocaust. Brenner writes, and I quote, "There we were, 10 Jewish Canadian soldiers. Being informed that there were many fellow Jews in nearby Belsen, we unanimously agreed to go over there. After traveling about 30 kilometers, we reached the notorious camp that the world should never forget. During the service, Kol Nidre was sung, but not in the manner that we were used to hearing it back home. It was heartrending. The rabbi chanted with such broken emotion and tears in his voice that we shall never forget the scene that we witnessed. The responses of the congregation rang out loudly, that at times it almost sounded as if they were being shouted for the whole world of Jewry to hear. When the time came for the Kaddish to be said, there was not a member in the congregation who did not recite for a mother, father, wife, husband, or child. It was as if the whole were in mourning. On forthcoming Yom Kippurs that we hope to celebrate someday in Canada, these scenes that we were able to see of what has been done to a people just because they were Jews will always live in our memories." Signed, one of the 10, Signalman Abraham Brenner. End quote. And with that, I thank you.
So now it is my absolute pleasure to present Charlotte Chalier with the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards in the category of biography for But I Live, which she co-edited. Charlotte Chalier is a professor of German and Slavic languages at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. Her research focuses, among other things, on the Holocaust, genocide and human rights, and on memory studies, visual culture, and graphic narratives. But I Live, put simply, is an extraordinary book. It emerged from encounters between Holocaust survivors and artists who were born later. In powerful ways, But I Live exemplifies the power of nonfiction graphic books to convey the experiences and the after effects of the Holocaust. The narratives by survivors, the stories by survivors that are in this book, themselves make this book prizeworthy. But the book does much more than that. Along with the stories of the past that the illustrations and the text so powerfully capture, the book probes the impact of engaging in this project on the artists themselves. The collection of graphic stories, historical essays, and reflections contained in But I Live is a profound meditation on the past and its reach into the present. So I invite Charlotte Chalier to come up and accept this much-deserved award. Here you go.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for this wonderful introduction. And I hope that you will be showing the amazing artwork while I speak. I'm deeply, deeply honored to receive this Canadian Jewish Literary Award, accepting it on behalf of Miriam Libicki, David Schaefer, Gilad Seligtar, Nico and Rolf Kamp, Barbara Jelin, and Emmy Arbel. We sincerely thank the jurors for reviewing our book and for granting us this incredible honor and recognition. I also gratefully acknowledge our visual storytelling project team, which co-created the foundation for this book, allowing us to pursue a community-engaged, collaborative, and trauma-informed approach that focuses on creative testimony collection practices and arts-based co-creation. Our project would not have been possible without the generous support of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I would also like to thank our editor at New Jewish Press, Natalie Fingerhut, who has supported us throughout each stage and has been wonderful to work with. We are immensely grateful to our community partners at the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, and the Ravensbrück Memorial in Fürstenberg-Havel, Germany. Our gratitude also goes to our student researchers and our translators who have supported the artists and survivors throughout the project and publishing process. Some of our team members are here today. Noga, Mark, thank you. The three graphic narratives in But I Live amplify the voices of Holocaust survivors and acknowledge and respect a survivor's right to tell their own story. The artwork of Miriam Libicki, Gilad Seligtar, and Barbara Jelin brings many complicating narratives to the fore. The graphic narratives illuminate the burden of memory, the need to testify, and the impact of the Holocaust on descendants of survivors. As such, these narratives hold space for fragmented memories, difficult emotions, and the ripple effects of trauma. Emmy Arbel, David Schaefer, and Nico and Rolf Kamp are knowledge holders who continue to engage with us in this current moment, making the history and memory of the Holocaust relevant and urgent for our present times. Our work builds on foundational research by Henry Greenspan and other survivor-centered projects. These projects demonstrate a continued critical need for testimony collection practices that not only respect the singular contexts of survivors, but also honor the integrity and humanity of a person's lived experience. When I first reached out to Barbara, Miriam, and Gilad 4 years ago, I was unable to articulate how our work together would unfold. I envisioned the work to be collaborative, creative, and process-driven, allowing us to build trust-based relationship over the course of several years. As we moved along, we learned to engage in practices that were responsive to the fluid and emergent needs of the survivors, their families, and the artists. I still vividly remember when I received the first sketches and storyboards from the artists. It was overwhelming and difficult for me to contain my emotions. I remember that I immediately called up my friend and project partner Matt Hokulak, shouting at him, "I think it works. I think this is going to be a book." And now it seems unbelievable to be recognized by the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards. The work of Miriam Libicki, Barbara Jelin, and Gilad Seligtar is extraordinary and powerful, as you can see. But so is their commitment to capturing the life stories of 4 Holocaust survivors with utmost dignity, care, and love. But I Live is dedicated to the families of David, Emmy, Nico, and Rolf. It is thus with great joy and gratitude that I acknowledge David's son, Ayal Schaefer, and his granddaughter, Joelle, who are here today in the audience. When David is asked to sign But I Live for his readers, he oftentimes adds, "Cherish freedom," to his signature. And it is with these words, David's words, "Cherish freedom," that I would like to conclude. Thank you again for this incredible honor.
That concludes the formal part of the Canadian Jewish Literary Awards today. I found today very moving. I read all the books, and the books were terrific, but to actually see the authors in person is an incredible experience, and to get the background of how they were written, why they were written, and what they mean is really meaningful. And I thank all the authors really for the work that they put into it. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to invite all the winners, the authors, to come up to the podium, and the jury as well, so that you could look at them and acknowledge them all one more time. What you saw today. What you saw today really showed what the Jewish literary culture is about, because we've gone from antiquity to the modern day. And I have a question for the audience, for the jurors, and for the authors about the definition of what Jewish culture is from your perspective, and you could talk to each other as well. You got to hear each other's speeches about what the meaning is for you of Jewish culture after you saw what we heard today. Anybody want to talk about it?
That's a hard one. On pornography.
Come over to the.
I like that.
Sorry, you want to talk about it? Does anybody else have any questions that they would want to ask our authors, or the authors to ask each other about the works that they did and how they did it? If not, I'll conclude, and I'll thank you all for being with us today. We'll see you all next year, hope maybe in person, and thank you again. Bye-bye.